Howdy everyone, Nicole Sauce here. A couple of you have asked me what's so special about Holler Roast Coffee, and a lot of it is what goes in to finding the perfect blend of beans or single source coffee bean. So you see, when I started this whole adventure, it was basically because I had run out of coffee. There was no good coffee to buy in the area, and so I went online and I thought, well, Google will teach me how to roast coffee, and then maybe I can buy a bunch of beans in bulk and roast just for us. And I started with one of these. I started with a cast iron skillet, and I learned how to roast coffee with this and a spatula. Over time, I graduated to a popcorn, like a kettle corn maker, and then I had this drum that used to go on my grill, but over time it just wasn't quite as good as what I could get from craft roasters. So I got a home roasting machine. And for years, I sold coffee from the home roaster and then roasted for us here at home. But there was always this thing that happened every year. Beans would come in, they're green like this, and I would roast them, and they taste great. And I'd keep ordering that kind, whether it be a Colombian, a Bolivian, a Guatemalan, and every so often, all of a sudden, they taste funny. And I'd be like, is it me? And what I figured out happened is from year to year to year, beans from the same farm, they taste different. And if blight gets into the tree, it can add an off flavor. If something went wrong when they were water processing the beans and a little mold got in there, that can add flavors. So I started this annual event in the fall where I would order like 20 kinds of coffee, and I'd roast them all, and I'd taste them all, and we'd like line up mugs like these. We'd have a whole line of shot glasses here. I'd go through and taste, friends would go through and taste, family would go through and taste. We'd change the order around because sometimes what you tasted right before affects what happens afterwards. And what I was always going for is not too bitter, a deep chocolate caramel flavor for Holler Roast Coffee. And that worked really well. People loved my coffee. Well, then I decided to go to an event, and I presented at the event about how much money you can make just as a side hustle roasting coffee with a home roaster. And when I ran the numbers, it was, you could make $400 a month about if you maxed out your roaster and did it a lot. Well, okay, so that's not that great, is it? You can't live off $400 a month. And so I went and I looked for commercial roasters. And they were like $20,000 just to get one roaster. Well, while I was at that event, I met somebody who found a better mid-range option for the roaster, and I ended up doing a Kickstarter, which helped me buy my roaster. And what I did in the Kickstarter was basically just pre-sold a bunch of coffee for people. Well, the first thing that happened is my farm ran out of beans, so like I'm in the middle of this Kickstarter. I've got like 50 of these at the house I got to try. People are coming in and I'm like, try this, what do you think? And I had to readjust the Holler blend. Now the flavor is very close to what it's always been. And what happens now is periodically, about quarterly, every year, I taste a bunch of beans from a bunch of farms. Well, what can you do when you have that kind of an opportunity? Like, I know what a lot of beans taste like. Turns out, some people don't like the flavors of coffee that I like. So as I started talking to different people, some people like more citrus, some people like more cinnamon, and I started coming up with this idea of a signature blend. Our first signature blend that we launched was the knife maker one, Patrick's Private Reserve. Took us a year to figure that out. I talked to him, I interviewed him, heard what he was looking for in a flavor, and then sent him some beans, and it took us a while to figure it out. Well, I was at Jack Spirko's, and the same thing happened. I talked to him about what he likes. Turns out I do a lot of dark roast coffee. He likes a blonde. The reason he likes a blonde roast is you can taste the flavors of the bean. The darker you get in a roast, the more you're tasting the roast and the less you're tasting the bean. The bean still affects what it tastes like, but as it gets darker, it's more about the roast and less about the bean. So he said, I really like blondes because I can taste the bean, and he's a guy who likes a lot of different flavors. So we talked a bit about the kind of flavors he liked. He told me about a coffee that another brand makes that he really likes. It's almost never available. I did some research on that processing method, and I tripped across bourbon cooling, which is cooling the bean, not bourbon, vodka cooling. Anyway, you cool the beans with vodka, And the faster cooling brings out more flavor. If you go too fast, it does too much of that, it's not a good thing. So you have to find the balance between cooling the coffee at the right speed to bring out the flavor. Well, that was interesting. So I sent him a bag of Holler Roast that was cooled with vodka, and he liked it. And then he sent me an email that said, Jack's Blonde Bourbon Cooled Coffee. And I thought, bourbon instead of vodka, let's give it a try. So after talking to him about the flavors he likes, I tasted a bunch of coffee, narrowed it down to 6, sent him 6 samples, and he came back loving the Sumatran bourbon cooled. So that is how we dial in a signature blend. There are 2 available on the website right now. We've just launched Jack's Blonde Bourbon Cooled Sumatran. They're only 100 pounds right now, and they're selling fast. If you want to get one, you better jump on that. The bourbon cooling process takes some extra time, but it's really worth it. So I invite you to check it out, and that is what goes in to Holler Roast Coffee.